He contemptuously detested William Frawley. We are now aware of the reason. At the age of 64 and resentful, William Frawley was in 1951, when he finally met his co-star from I Love Lucy. Something snapped in his mind. All aspects of her were abhorrent to him. She endured a living hell on set for a period of 6 years. When he was in rehearsal, he would explode. When she was overweight, he would make horrible jokes about it. He went so far as to prevent her from seeing any of the other sets that he worked on. As a form of resistance, she refused to join him in filming sequences in the bedroom. What he did to exact his retribution will forever be a relic in the annals of television history. On the 26th of February in the year 1887, William Clement Frawley was born in the city of Burlington, Iowa. His Irish Catholic family was of the working-class background. In the past, his father, Michael, held the position of steamboat captain. Mary, his mother, was quite devout in her religious beliefs. In 1907, when Michael passed away, William was only 20 years old. Mary's hold on her children got even more firm as the weight of bearing the responsibility of providing for the family increased. On 6th Street, where they lived, they were surrounded by other immigrant families who were also struggling. William was the second child out of a total of 4. There were 3 of his siblings, John, Paul, and Mary. Every single one of them was supposed to lead quiet and respectable lives, yet William had other things in mind. As a result of his participation in the choir at St. Paul's Catholic Church, his mother was filled with pride. On the other hand, he began conducting performances at the Burlington Opera House in a covert manner. It was at that point when the problems started. Mary was of the opinion that the entertainment industry was corrupt. She gave him a note that was really frightening once she discovered that he had been performing in secret. Rather than watching him become an actress, she stated that she would rather bury him. Even though he was devastated, William was more determined than he had ever been. He detested the way in which she displayed his golden hair in a doll-like manner. Then, one day, he made her cut them against her will after children made fun of him. Nevertheless, the powerful Irish tenor voice that he possessed stood out. Moreover, he was not going to throw it away. He decided to work as a stenographer for the Union Pacific Railroad in Omaha, so that he might fulfill his mother's expectations. He detested each and every moment of it. In addition to wearing flamboyant jackets and brown derby hats, he even spattering. It appeared as though he was going to start singing, which caused the people in the office to react with laughter. Also, he did it on occasion. Ragtime and Irish ballads are examples. While he was performing the tedious administrative tasks, he sang all of them. But after 2 years, he had reached his limit. Following his relocation to Chicago, he found employment as a court reporter. It had a respectable sound about it. Although it was not what he desired, it was a step in the right direction toward independence. It was in Chicago that he made his first attempt at it. The Flirting Princess is a musical comedy that was performed at the Lazel Theater, and he tried out for a part in the production. He was cast in the role. It was the first time he had ever been compensated for singing on stage. After learning the truth, his mother completely lost it. Another cruel letter was written by her, and William once again began packing his belongings. For the sole purpose of calming her down, he relocated to St. Louis and resumed his career as a railroad worker. However, there was a shift in place. He felt more alive as a result of that performance. He was convinced that he possessed something unique. In a later statement, he even asserted that he was the first person to perform the song, My Melancholy Baby. However, there are many who disagree with this assertion. The spark had been ignited despite this. He continued to fight for his dream. Together with his brother Paul, he collaborated on a vaudeville performance. In the year 1908, they gave a performance together, with Paul playing the role of the straight man and William managing the comic. They were well received by audiences, but after 6 months their mother struck once more. Her actions compelled Paul to go back to Iowa. Instantaneously, the act was no longer alive. While William was fuming with rage, he did not give up. In 1910, He made more than $500 from the sale of a script that he had written entitled Fun to a vaudeville agency. That was a fortune, which is about equivalent to $15,000 now. To put it simply, it was the very first time that entertainment actually paid off. Using the money, he relocated to Denver and began performing at the Rex Cafe, where he earned $23 per week. Even though his brother had disappeared, he now had evidence. There was more to this than a dream. This was a job, a legitimate one. Subsequently, he formed a partnership with a pianist by the name of France Rath. Their performance was referred to as a man, a piano, and a nut. He was the one who was nuts. During their performance in San Francisco, they sang songs, told jokes, and performed physical comedy. At last, he was in his natural environment. It was also at this time that his drinking began to spiral out of control. Being a vaudeville performer was a challenging existence, traveling, drinking alcohol, and staying up late. After a period of 4 years, William finally came into contact with Edna Louise Brough. In 1914, on November 1st, he tied the knot with Edna. Through her work in silent film shorts, she had already established herself as a rising performer. They came together to form the singing and comedy act known as Frawley and Louise, which was a huge success in the vaudeville world. On the Orpheum and Keith circuits, they achieved a great deal of success. In the world of vaudeville, those were the most prestigious acts. They were the main attraction. It was a crowd favorite. Their onstage chemistry was seamless and flawless. Despite the fact that their personal lives were beginning to fall apart, they decided to part ways in 1921, but they continued to perform together for another 6 years. 1927 was the year when they lastly divorced. There was a toxic atmosphere in the relationship. In addition to drinking heavily, William pursued other women. Edna was possessive and consumed by jealousy. Although the act and the marriage came to an end, the damage continued to be felt. William did not pursue another marriage, particularly with regard to women. He developed a sour and cynical attitude. In later years of his life, he used that resentment to mold the way he portrayed characters. At the time that William Frawley eventually made his debut on Broadway, he was already 38 years old. In the musical comedy titled Mary, Mary, which was performed at the Vanderbilt Theater on September 24, 1925, he made his debut by performing on stage. It was performed 197 times before it was finally shut down on March 13, 1926. For the time, that was a really impressive run. But what made this so remarkable was the fact that Frawley had come from a different place. Over the course of more than 10 years, he had earned his way through the competitive vaudeville world. Initially, he was with his brother Paul, and later on, he was with his wife Edna Louise Brough. Their performance was referred to as Frawley and Louise. Vaudeville was not a world of glamour. It meant there was no assurance of ever rising up in the company, extensive travel, and low pay. In addition, vaudevillians were looked down upon on Broadway during the 1920s. They had a reputation for being loud, crude, and second-rate. As a result, the transition that Frawley made from that world to a prestigious stage on Broadway was more than just a stride in his career. It was a brave move, because of his deep and booming voice, which he had cultivated while singing in church in Iowa. He was now winning over audiences in New York. Mary Mary did not merely hand him a paycheck and walk away. He gained legitimacy as a result. 7 years later, he decided to take an even more major risk. The year 1932 marked Frawley's return to Broadway, but this time he played an entirely different kind of part. The situation was not a joke this time. Not much a musical was it. During the theatrical play 20th Century, which was written by Ben Heck and Charles MacArthur, he portrayed the role of Owen Ollie, a press agent. Broadhurst Theater was the location where it was first shown on December 29. The character was a quick-witted, intelligent, and jaded individual. It was necessary for Frawley to abandon the songs and the humor in order to convey genuine, sharp speech. More than that, he was able to pull it off. It was clear from his performance that he was not nothing more than a one-off entertainer. He was also capable of playing challenging and dramatic roles. Later on, that play served as the inspiration for the screwball comedy film that was released in 1934 and starred John Barrymore and Carole Lombard. It is possible that critics would consider that movie to be a model for the entire genre. On stage, without any kind of safety net, Frawley had been the first to accomplish this feat. The character he played altered how people perceived him. It was also noticed by scouts from the Hollywood industry. In fact, Frawley had signed a contract with Paramount in 1916 and had even participated in a few silent films, but it wasn't until 1932 that he made a complete commitment to the Hollywood industry. In addition, he was 45 years old at the time. The majority of actors at that age were at a slower pace. He was just on the verge of beginning. The film industry was in a dire situation at the time. There was a severe impact of the Great Depression, and speeches were still a novel and challenging genre. Despite the fact that studios were reluctant to take risks, Frawley went ahead and did it anyhow. After signing a 7-year contract with Paramount, he was ready to move to Los Angeles and began his journey. This wasn't only a shift for professional reasons. It turned out to be a total reset. At an age when most people were seeking for steady work or retirement, he was entering a new medium, a new city, and new regulations. He was also changing the rules. Despite this, he managed to make it work. More than 100 pictures would be starring Frawley over the course of the subsequent 35 years. Despite the fact that he was not a leading man, he rose to become the kind of actor that filmmakers sought for. Irrespective of whether he was playing a tough guy, comic relief, or wise elderly men, he never failed to deliver. Miracle on 34th Street, which he played in 1947, is considered to be one of his most renowned film roles. The character of Charlie Howard, the political advisor to Judge Harper, was portrayed by Frawley. It was a relatively minor role, but it left an indelible impression. During a secluded moment, Howard cautions the judge that if he decides that Santa Claus is not real, it might completely destroy his prospects of being reelected. Because it is so accurate, it is not just brilliant and subtle, but also amusing. Frawley came out on top. In no way did he overact. He did not exert an excessive amount of effort. Simply allowing the lines to do the talking, he added just the right amount of weight to ensure that both the judge and the audience paid attention. Despite the fact that it was a little job, Frawley had become very good. It was possible for him to infuse a brief moment with significance. In addition to being able to make a political point without preaching, he was also capable of being both humorous and serious at the same time. As of 1951, William Frawley's career was in the process of disintegrating. When he was 64 years old, he had already appeared in more than 100 films. On the other hand, Hollywood was no longer calling. These studios were looking for younger actors. In addition, there were not many choices available for someone like Frawley, who was divorced and living alone in a cramped apartment alone. Back in 1914, he had begun his career in the vaudeville industry, and the future appeared to be a dark one after decades of laborious effort. Next, he became aware of a sound. Dacey Arnaz and Lucille Ball were in the process of launching a brand new television show. They were looking for someone to play the role of Fred Mertz, a surly landlord. It was not necessary for Frawley to wait for an audition or for his agency to intervene. The phone was picked up by him, and he made the call to Lucille Ball himself. She was taken aback by it. They had only a passing familiarity with one another. That phone call, however, altered everything. It was the moment that prevented him from losing his job. Despite this, Dacey Arnaz was not entirely certain. The reputation that Frawley had was a negative one. His drinking, his disruptive behavior on set, and his absences from work were all well known. Dacey approached CBS and the sponsors with the idea of hiring him, but they all declined his offer. One of them even stated, "He's an alcoholic. You'd be crazy to hire him. There are better, more dependable actors out there." Dacey, however, sensed something in Frawley that he wanted to work with. he was willing to take the chance. He made him an offer for the post, but there were some conditions attached. However, Frawley had one demand that he wanted to make. If the New York Yankees were to win the World Series, he desired to take a vacation in the month of October. This was not a joke at all. Frawley was a devoted supporter of the Yankees. However, despite the fact that he was in dire need of employment, he refused to give up those games. They were required to include that in his contract by him. He wouldn't be working on the set if the Yankees were successful. Despite the fact that it was merely a formality, that clause became legendary in the Hollywood industry. During the time that Frawley was acting on I Love Lucy, the Yankees were able to win the World Series 7 times. In light of this, the presentation had to adapt to accommodate him. It was necessary for them to have his role completely removed from 2 episodes. Writers were forced to search for explanations in a hurry. It was Fred's intention to cover for Frawley's absence by going out of town to visit relatives or doing anything else. It was a source of contention, but the squad persevered through it. That is the height of their regard for him. It was despite his reckless behavior and troubled past that Frawley was able to achieve fame. The role of Fred Mertz earned him nominations for 5 consecutive Emmy Awards, beginning in 1953 and continuing through 1957. His work was recognized by the business for a period of 5 years in a row, but he was never awarded. Still, the nominations were sufficient evidence of the profound connection he had established with audiences. The public had a deep affection for Fred Mertz, and Frawley had successfully transformed his waning career into a television success. On the other hand, something sinister was taking on behind the scenes. Fred was a villain in the eyes of Vivian Vance, who played Ethel Mertz, Fred's wife. It began on the very first day. When Vance found out that Frawley would be playing her husband, she blurted out, "That old coot could be my grandfather." She thought he was too old. Unfortunately, Frawley was right there when she said it. Vance's statement was a mistake. Every syllable was heard by him. A conflict that never came to an end was started by that comment. Frawley managed to remember it. He did not show forgiveness. Instead, he exacted his revenge. He began to contribute vicious jokes to the authors, lines that made fun of Ethel's appearance and were intended to be cruel. When he commented that she looked like a sack full of doorknobs, it became one of the most famous things he ever uttered. The act was his retribution. He made their private conflict a part of the act by incorporating it into. That big broad and the sack of doorknobs were 2 of the nicknames that he used to refer to her behind the scenes. He used these nicknames in front of the entire team. In Vance's opinion, the entire situation was intolerable. She detested acting as though she was not married to him. The fact that the audience believed she was genuinely married to this elderly man was a source of constant complaint for her. There was a discrepancy of 22 years in age. He was 64 years old, 42 was her age. At the same time, it made her feel like a joke. Irrespective of whether or not there were any situations in which they were required to be in bed together, she would rush through the scripts. There was more to it than simply vanity. She was certain that the coupling was detrimental to her professional life. The level of anxiety on site continued to rise. There were occasions when Frawley would not come out of his dressing room without being asked. Jess Oppenheimer, the mastermind behind the show, was the only person who could persuade him to go back to work. While this was going on, Vance began inserting insults into her own lines, referring to him as Old Fat Freddy while sequences were being filmed. The filming was disrupted, and life became more difficult for everyone involved as a result of their animosity, which spread throughout everything. When I Love Lucy came to an end in 1957, CBS came up with a fresh concept, a spin-off that would center on Fred and Ethel. They were among the most well-liked characters available on television. It was believed by executives that it could continue for many years and make a fortune. It was all in for Frawley. On Lucy, he was earning $7,500 a week, which is equivalent to approximately $75,000 per week in today's currency. The spin-off has the potential to double or even quadruple that amount. For once in his life, he saw an opportunity to be the center of attention. Immediately, he responded in the affirmative, even if it meant collaborating with Vivan Vance once more. However, Vance did not simply tell me no. Suddenly, she slammed the door shut. CBS even gave her a bonus of $50,000 merely to sign the contract. Currently, that amounts to $500,000. Despite this, she declined the offer. Frawley was hardly the only one she disliked. He was a source of hatred for her. She shared with her pals that she thought she couldn't stand to be in the same room as him, let alone perform beside him once more. Despite the fact that she was 22 years younger, she did not choose to continue playing the role of a stoic housewife to a man whom she felt ugly. The training she had received was for a serious acting role. The spin-off was not a dream for her. She said it was a trap, and she escaped at that moment. This decision caused Frawley a great deal of pain. The situation deteriorated after that. Following her subsequent participation in the Lucy program, Vance included a provision in her contract. Not even Frawley could make an appearance on the show. It had been confirmed. He was not allowed to participate. As a result of his resentment and anger, Frawley would come to the set in order to cause disruptions and generate noise. Film canisters would fall off him, and he would yell from the corridor. Both of them were victimized by their feud, which eventually became a Hollywood legend. As a result of the producers' desire to avoid the controversy, they decided to cease casting them together. The fact that they couldn't stand each other caused them to miss out on opportunities at work. The greatest loss, however, was not merely a personal one. It has to do with money. They could have generated millions of dollars with that spin-off. As a result of syndication, I Love Lucy made hundreds of millions of dollars. An episode of Fred and Ethel could have accomplished the same thing. For decades, they and their families would have been financially supported solely by residuals. In its place, they received nothing. William Frawley took over the role of Bubasy, the boy's maternal grandpa and housekeeper, when the first episode of My Three Sons aired on September 29, 1960. It turned out to be the ideal part for him. His tenure as Fred Mertz on I Love Lucy, which spanned 9 years, had just come to an end. However, Bob was not like him. There was no stiffness or artificiality in this character. He was known by his full Irish name, William Michael Francis Aloysius Ocasey, and possessed a demeanor that was consistent with Frawley's actual Irish-American heritage. It was finally an opportunity for him to play a character that was more in line with who he actually was. The name on its own gave the impression that it had been taken directly from an old Catholic parish in either Boston or Chicago. Not only was it deftly written, but it was also deeply personal. Fred McMurray, the show's main character, was someone whom Frawley had known for decades. Together, they appeared in the film Car 99, which was released in 1935. The reunion wasn't just a job, as it turned out. Having grown weary of portraying roles that he referred to as phony, Frawley was able to return to his previous level of performance. However, the performance is not the only thing that people remember most about his time spent on My Three Sons and the show. It was the goings-on that took place behind the scenes. Barry Livingston, who joined the ensemble in 1965 and played the role of Ernie, witnessed everything firsthand. He stated that Frawley would frequently engage in outrageous behavior in the presence of the children, stuff that is vulgar, the kinds of things that would get someone fired right now. To Frawley, however, it was nothing more than a good time. He enjoyed it when he could surprise the children and make them giggle. He had a special fondness for Barry and his brother Stanley, who also appeared on the show. He was a fan of both of them. Both of them were true brothers. Additionally, Frawley treated them as if they were his nephews, rough around the edges, yet they are filled with genuine affection. Undoubtedly, his humor was vulgar, but it was never nasty. Despite this, the set got increasingly difficult to handle as time went on. There was more to Frawley than just making jokes. It was during rehearsals that he began to lose his cool. Whenever he read a line from the screenplay, he would pause in the middle of the phrase and cry out, "Who writes this crap?" He would not say it in a quiet manner. The cast, the crew, and even the visitors would all be present when he did it. In particular, the fact that My Three Sons was shot in an unusual manner contributed to the elevated level of tension. Due to the fact that the star, Fred MacMurray, had a crowded movie schedule, the team was required to shoot all of his sequences in 2 concentrated periods of time each year. The remainder of the program revolved around that central idea. As a result of Frawley's outburst against the script, significant issues were discovered. Writers were at a loss for words. The directors were required to come up with other solutions. The situation was a complete mess. Despite the fact that he might not have gotten along with Daisy Arn, as everyone remembers how professional he had been on the show I Love Lucy, it seemed as though he had lost all concern at this point. Things began to deteriorate by 1964. It wasn't just a problem behind the scenes that Frawley was drinking. The show was suffering as a result. There were occasions when he would fall asleep in the middle of a scenario. The directors would shout out, "Cut," and then immediately begin to figure out how to go without him, in preparation for the possibility that Bub would not survive the day. The team began composing episodes that did not require him, or they would shoot scenes from angles that barely revealed him. The decision to replace him was made by the producers at some point. It was in 1965 when they decided to cast William Demarest in the role of Uncle Charlie, Bub's brother, in the theatrical production. In order to make the transition less abrupt, they explained that Bub had gone to see a sick relative. Even though it was not overt, everyone on site was aware of what was actually taking place. This was Frawley's 70th year. Drinking was not helping his health, which was deteriorating at an alarming rate. He suffered a heart attack and passed just 1 year after he had left the show. While this was the case, Barry Livingston held nothing but admiration for him. Barry claimed that Frawley was never actually harsh, even on the days when things were going poorly. Although he was gruff and occasionally rude, he was not a cruel person. During his time as a vaudeville performer, he enjoyed sharing stories. And despite the fact that his jokes were vulgar, he appeared to have a real concern for the children who were working on the site. Barry was of the opinion that the person that other people saw on screen was not a sham. William Frawley was the one who was talking. On March 3, 1966, only 5 days after turning 79 years old, William Frawley passed out on Hollywood Boulevard for no apparent reason. The evening had been spent by him alone at a movie theater, which was something he did very frequently. In the years that he spent living alone in the same flat, Frawley rarely engaged in social activities. Following the conclusion of the film, he exited the theater, continued walking for a short distance, and then collapsed to the ground. Without any prior warning, he suffered a major heart attack. At the Hollywood Receiving Hospital, he was hurried by others in the neighborhood, but it was already too late. As soon as he arrived, he was pronounced dead. For a man who had once made millions of people laugh, it was a lonely end by any measure. Nobody from his family or circle of acquaintances was present when he passed away. There was nothing but the bright lights of Hollywood, the city that had made him famous. It was on the same boulevard that his name had once been significant that he went to his death, a concluding scene that looked to be a reflection of his entire existence. In private, there is quiet of public success. However, the most shocking aspect was not the manner in which he passed away, but rather the response that someone had to it. When Vivian Vance, who portrayed the role of Ethel Mertz, his on-screen wife on the television show I Love Lucy, found out about the news, she was out to dinner with her friends. Despite the fact that they had worked together for a period of 6 years, the connection between them was fraught with animosity. The extent of Vance's hatred for Frawley was never concealed. She believed that he was both too elderly and too unpleasant, making him impossible to collaborate with. It is alleged that she smiled, raised her glass, and said, "Champagne for everyone." She then proceeded to purchase beverages for the entire restaurant after discovering that someone at her table had informed her that he had passed away. The news of that moment quickly went throughout the world. Insiders in the entertainment industry couldn't stop talking about it. The fact that they celebrated his death in public brought the situation to an entirely new level, even though everyone was already aware of their feud. It was a clear indication of how profound her resentment was. Years previously, she had even declined a spin-off series about Fred and Ethel in order to avoid ever acting with him again. Her decision was solely motivational. Everyone was taken aback by the number of people who showed up for the funeral when it finally arrived. The reputation of Frawley as a tough person was well known. He engaged in conflict with directors, paid no attention to producers, and showed no interest in forming friendships. On the other hand, a sizable crowd gathered at San Fernando Mission Cemetery to express their farewells. A good number of them were from the business sector, others who had worked with him over the course of several decades. They recognized his talent despite the fact that he had a nasty personality. A full-page advertisement was placed in the trade journals by Da Arnaz, who was one of the few persons who had genuine feelings for him. The photo of Frawley was displayed with a black border and only 3 words written in Spanish surrounding it. "Hello there, my friend." In addition, Arnaz was a member of the Palborough team, which also included Fred McMurray and producer Don Fedderson. A sincere homage was offered by Lucille Ball, who, like Frawley, experienced both highs and lows in her relationship with him. She referred to him as one of her closest friends and stated that the industry has suffered the grave loss of one of its most talented character performers. That day, it didn't matter what grievances individuals held against Frawley, they were irrelevant. The work was the only thing that counted, and he had done it very well. However, the ultimate surprise, which no one had anticipated, arrived at that moment. People who were in mourning noticed someone standing off to the side of the rest of the guests. The eyes were fixated on the casket, in complete silence. It was Vivan Vance talking. The same woman who had attended the burial and hailed his passing with champagne just a few days earlier was there at the service. Her expression was difficult to read. Some individuals reported that they perceived a hint of remorse. Some people believed that it could have been an act of guilt, while others believed that it was simply a matter of closure. Her arrival surprised everyone, but no one knew for certain what she was doing. It was the kind of phenomenon that would be discussed for a considerable amount of time. What was her reason for coming? Perhaps she wanted to make amends with a man she detested, or perhaps to admit that despite everything that had happened, he had been a figure in her story as well.